I've written down just in case. Let's say you're in a hurry. You might say, I do need to run right now because I have an appointment. Or if somebody asks you, how are you? Instead of saying the very standard replies, you could say something like, I'm taking it one day at a time. And speaking of that, there's a very important thing to note about the word a. Because most non-native speakers, they tend to pronounce it separately and they use the strong form, because a has two forms. There's the strong form and there's the weak form. As in any language, native speakers tend to attenuate. Instead of using strong pronunciation all the time, they try to make it easy and fast. So instead of saying at a time, that would be very would be very demanding, that would take a lot of energy. So instead of saying at a time, they say at a time. They sort of abbreviate the sound. In technical terms, the linguists, they call this sound the schwa sound. It's a very technical term. It's in fact it's the most common sound in English. It's called the schwa, SCHWA. SCHWA. It's a very soft sound. It's if we isolate it, it's So its linguistic symbol is a bit like I don't know if you know the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. It was designed like 50 years ago. It's if you open any dictionary, you find some strange symbols. If you're not familiar with them, they will look like very strange symbols, maybe Greek, a bit Greek. Those are the International Phonetic Alphabets. They have been used to transcribe every sound that are known to humans. So they cover every language: Italian, Spanish, French, English, every language that exists. So maybe it would be worth, especially since you're in the academic world, maybe it would be worth it for you to learn some basic IPA. Maybe find some videos on YouTube and learn the most common ones, like the schwa. The schwa is the most common one. And once you'll know that, you'll be able to take any dictionary and learn the correct pronunciation. Because English is different from Spanish and other languages that are similar to Spanish, since it's not pronounced the way that it's written. Sometimes it's very different. Especially if the word is a foreign word. The British, they tend to, not only the British but also the American, especially the Americans, they tend to change the way a word is pronounced. For example, you have the French word croissant. It's the I don't know how to describe it. It's you must know croissant. A British maybe would say croissant. Maybe they would accentuate the T at the end. So they would say something like croissant. So if you don't know what they are saying, you might make a mistake or not understand anything he's saying. Or the word in French, you have the word lingerie. The Americans, they tend to say it lingerie. So, also the French expression déjà vu. The Americans, they say the first word correctly, they say déjà, but the second word, they don't say vu, they say it vous. So they say déjà vu. So maybe one of the best ways maybe would be through, you could watch a lot of movies. I like The Big Bang Theory because it's sort of academic. You have all these professors and teachers, especially Sheldon. He uses a lot of formal expressions. Let me just check the messages. So I'm back, 0 message, just 1 viewer. Let me continue. Yeah, as I was saying, the accents can be a problem. There are 2 main accents. You have the British accent, from which you could say the Australian and the Kiwi accent derive from. And then you have the other main type of accent, which is the US accent. In the USA, there's the general standard American accent. That's the one you will hear on most movies. And then you have a lot of regional accents, especially in the South. Maybe you will notice a difference between New York and California, for example. But mostly you will have this opposition between British English and American English. For example, the French capital, the French city Paris. The British would say Paris. The British would say Paris, whereas the Americans, they would say Paris. So you could see there's a clear distinction between the two, Paris and Paris. They both mean the same thing, but you could use either of those. Most people would understand you, but maybe the best advice would be to stay consistent. If you use American accent, then use it most of the time as much as possible, and vice versa, because otherwise it could be confusing. Let me see. Another common mistake that students tend to make is they sort of translate word for word. So if they want to say something, instead of saying it, if instead of thinking like a native speaker, they tend to think of it in their language and then translate it word for word. For example, a common mistake would be, do you know a good doctor? The correct way of saying it is, do you know of a good doctor? Because you only say I know something or I know someone when you know him or it personally. Otherwise, if you have only heard of somebody, or you have just just very superficial knowledge about something or someone, you don't say I know a good doctor or I know mathematics. No, you would say I know of a good doctor. So that's a very small but important piece of advice. Also, another academic distinction is between the vocabulary, the word imply and the word infer. Most students, they tend to confuse both of those terms. For them, they believe that imply and infer are the same thing, when in fact they are opposites. It's like the first one, to imply, means to hint at something. For example, he implied that she was pregnant. In other words, he hinted at the possibility or at the fact that the girl was pregnant. But to infer means to sort of deduct, to make an educated guess. So you could say somebody, like the speaker, he implies, and the listener, he infers. So it's a two-way. Another confusing aspect of spoken English is the use of interjections. An interjection is something like, especially if you hear the Canadians, they use a lot of interjections like a. They end their sentences with a. For example, um, they could say it's raining a. They end their sentences with the word a, with the sound a. It's not formal. It's an informal way of speaking. So they could say it's nice here. A. You could replace a with right. Some people, they use the word right when they end a sentence and they want to ask a question. It's mostly in Canada. Mm, maybe another thing would be uh, pronunciation. You do not pronounce most languages, like not most, but most Romance languages like Italian and Spanish. They are sort of you pronounce syllable by syllable, but in English, no, they are not. You don't have any rule. You don't have any formal rule that applies, that is universal, that applies every time. No, you will have to learn them, all the exceptions, but a good rule would be would be uh, hmm, would be to isolate the sounds. So the word, let me type it. Uh, this word, an Italian or Spanish, they could say despite, but actually it's not despite, it's despite. So a Spanish person would say despite because there would be an interference between his own um, his own native language. For example, the word despacito. Despacito in Spanish. Spanish, they tend to they tend they tends there's sort of an interference between Spanish and English. The words might look the same. In fact, they are called false friends. The words that look the same but don't mean the same thing, and don't sound the same. So the word despite is not pronounced despite; it's despite. Um, names, for example, some foreign names, they are pronounced very differently sometimes. Instead of, for example, the name J, it's a very common French name, Jean, Jean. In French, they would say Jean, but in English, they could pronounce it Jean. And in fact, in English, this name is usually a female name, so that could cause some confusion. Also, the French name Guy, it's written Juy. A British person could say Guy. There's no right or wrong way, but the person whose name is Guy, maybe he won't like the fact that you are addressing him as Guy. Maybe he will think that you're making fun of his name, something like that. So it's a very sensitive subject. And even in Italian, you have Andrea. Andrea is usually a male name in Italy, but most people outside of Europe, especially in America or Australia, they could think it's a girl because it's mostly a girl name overseas. Andrea. Let's say you're starting a formal address. Maybe you're starting a seminar. You could say ladies and gentlemen or ladies and gents. That would be a nice way of starting the presentation. Or if you're proposing a toast, maybe at a wedding, then you could say, "I would like to propose a toast." Let me just check the messages. I'm back. Uh, let's say you're asking for somebody's help. You could say, I'm hoping to enlist your help. It's a very formal way of saying, could you please help me? And if you're leaving, then you could say, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Means it was nice meeting you. And again, if let's say you would like to have a glass of water, maybe you could say, may I trouble you for a glass of water or for a pen or anything for a minute. Another formal expression is the expression to elect or to elect not. For example, you have this when you choose your papers at university, you have electives. These are the optional papers that you choose. You have they are compulsory papers and then they are optional papers. So you have to It's in fact, there's also the word election. That it must come from the same word, I suppose. Yeah, the word election, because you choose for whom you would like to vote, who you would see represent you at the parliament. Another expression is the expression to entertain an idea. For example, I entertain the idea of giving up my studies. It would be a very formal way of saying I'm thinking about dropping out. Another way for saying it was nice meeting you is pleasure doing business with you. When you shake hands, you could say that it was a pleasure doing business with you. Now let's say you're resign you're submitting your letter of resignation. You don't want to work at the place anymore. You could say I'm tendering sorry I'm tendering my resignation. Uh, let's say you'd like to make an appointment with somebody, especially somebody important. You could say, I would like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. That would be a formal way of saying, could we please schedule an appointment very soon? Earliest convenience. Or now let's say you have taken a lot of time to respond to somebody, maybe an email. Somebody sent you an email a few days ago, but you haven't had the time to reply to the email. You could write, sorry for the delay, blah blah blah. Another very academic word is the word peruse. I think maybe it comes from Latin or something. The word peruse, it's spelled Peruse. Peruse. It means to read. It's a very formal way of saying to read, especially important documents. So you could say somebody, uh, for example, to your boss. You could say to your boss that you have drafted the document that he requested, and that he may peruse it at his leisure. So that would be one way of saying he can read it when he has time. The British, they tend to use a lot of very polite expressions. They use very polite way. Compared to the Americans, the British tend to use a lot of euphemisms. So instead of saying it's very strange, an American would say it's very strange. A British, maybe he would say, this is most unusual. It's a very posh way of speaking. And you tend to see it in movies. In movies, the aristocrats and other high class actors, they tend to speak like this. Sometimes even the villains in James Bond's, for example, in James Bond, they could say, instead of saying it's stupid to refuse such an opportunity, they could say it would be foolish to squander such an opportunity. And the native speakers, they tend to use some contractions, especially the Americans. Instead of saying, what are you doing? they would say, "What you're doing? What you're doing?" Especially, I think in New York or something like that, they use lots of expressions like that, contractions. For example, and that's the following expression is quite common around the world. Instead of saying "How are you?" they could say "How's it going?" It's a contraction. How is it going? So they say it, "How's it going?" Just mean how are you? How are things? It's a very informal way of speaking, but it's very common. So you won't hear a native speaker say, "How are you?" That would be a very strange way. It's mostly students, non-native students. They tend to speak like that. And then someone will automatically know that these people, they are not native speakers. They are students. They are foreigners or tourists. So instead of saying, "How are you?" it's better to say something like, "How's it going?" But only if it's not like somebody very important, because otherwise you could offend them. Then in that case, let's say you're meeting with the president of your let's say, I don't know, with a very big president, Barack Obama or Donald Trump. When you meet for the first time, the formal way of saying "How are you?" is "How do you do?" That's the first time you meet someone. You don't say "How are you?" You say "How do you do?" It's a very formal way. And then the other person, usually they will reply with the same expression. They would say, "How do you do?" So it's a very confusing expression. If you don't know it, you could think that they are asking you a question, because actually it's a question, but they call it a rhetorical question. It's a question that is not actually a question. It's called a rhetorical question. Let's say you're writing an important letter, maybe a complaint. You could start the letter with the sentence, "I am writing to bring to your attention an issue of concern." That would be a very formal way of saying, "I would like to bring to your attention this or that matter." So, "I am writing to bring to your attention an issue of concern." Let me just see if there's any message. So you've been trying to chat. I don't see the message. Let me minimize. Un attimo, per favore. Group chat. Yeah, I can see your comment now. Let me just erase some of those notes. Yep. So yeah, just ask any question. I can. So we have two viewers. I think one of them must be me or something like that. And if you want, you can write in Italian or anything. I could use Google Translate if I can't understand you. It's pretty good actually. Are you studying chemistry by any chance? Because your name is Alchemist. Yep, just ask any question. Hopefully, I will know the answer. So you're studying engineering. Uh, you pronounce that word trouble. You have two syllables. The first one is tr, maybe like a tr, tr, trouble. The second syllable is bull. So, in fact, maybe one way to memorize pronunciation would be for you to transcribe those words. Let's say, let me type it. Trouble. To transcribe it like that, for example, or even like that. Trouble. That would be a very, very nice way to memorize it. And then you could also add, let's say, I don't know if you're familiar with mnemonics. Mnemonics, they are a way to memorize anything actually. Uh, you could write. It's better if you could like save everything that you're trying to learn, write it down. Especially now you have computers and everything. You could open a notepad and then save everything that you're trying to learn. It would be easier for you to memorize. Even if you don't read it ever, if you don't ever read it again, you will be able to memorize it better. So, for example, in this case, trouble, tr, tr, you could say you could remember tr by remembering another word that you know, maybe tree, the word tree, and then the that's a very common way. Uh, the native speakers, they tend to use this a lot when they don't know what to say, when they're taking time to think about an answer. They tend to say uh, especially if they are maybe on TV, on radio, or on a stage, and don't have they don't have a lot of experience, so they will tend to say to think. It's not a very good practice, but when you're starting to speak, you especially if you don't know what you're saying, then you tend to say this syllable So yeah, trouble. And to remember bull, maybe you could associate it with let's say the word bull. So trouble. me just see if you. You have difficulties understanding the sound tr. Actually, the sound tr, the r, the r sound in English, it's not like in Spanish, because in Spanish the r, they roll it, so they say r. They roll their r's, but in English you don't actually have an equivalent sound. It's especially if you would like to speak British English. The British speakers, they won't really pronounce the word r, so they could say, for example, let's say this word, a British speaker would say here, here, whereas an American, maybe he would say here. The Americans, they tend to roll slightly, they tend to roll their r's very, very slightly. There's a technical term for that, I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. The important part is that if you, maybe it's the R, trouble, 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 trouble. Yeah, the R is almost an invisible sound in that word. Trouble, trouble. Yeah, even the Americans, they would not roll it too much. They would say trouble. An important resource that you could use to learn pronunciations would be, let me see. It's, I'm sure you've heard about Cambridge University, or maybe I think there are many online dictionaries. The cool thing about those is that if you type the word, let's say if you go to, let me copy the link. So if you go to this website, you can type any word. It's mostly the common words in English, and then you click on the speaker icon, and you will see, you will hear a native speaker pronouncing the word. I think it has recorded the most common English words, maybe the 100,000 most common words. So you will be able to find pretty much anything. So yeah, it's a very cool site. It's free. So I think you might be able to find some apps also on your phone, maybe some apps, and maybe even on YouTube there are some channels. Let me see. Only 2 viewers, and one of them must be me, I suppose. And yeah, if you have any question, just let me know. I can see you now. And another great thing about this website is that they usually have the two main pronunciation. They have the British and the American pronunciation. So you will be able to know both varieties. And let me resume. I think there's an Italian word, for example, trente. It's different. It's different. It's not the same. Trouble. And there's the word treble. Treble. Treble means, for example, if your football club has won 3 trophies, you can say it has won the treble. So if you have any question, just let me know. I will continue. Otherwise, let's say you would like to speak in private with somebody at the university, for example. If there's a professor that you would like to speak to, but the professor, let's say he is giving a lecture right now, but it's a very urgent matter. So maybe you could approach him and then ask him, "May I have a word? Sorry, may I have a word with you privately?" That's a very polite way of saying, "Could we please speak in private?" So, what type of engineering are you studying? Is it chemical? Or... Mm. Electric. Electronic, sorry. Electronic engineer. That's very cool. I found some videos on YouTube. They are quite hard to understand. Electronic engineer, but it's a very promising field. So I guess you won't have any problem getting a job. Everything is electronic nowadays. Electronic engineer. I think it's one of the best paid jobs in America. You have petroleum engineer. I think petroleum. If you get a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineer, you'd be among the best paid. And then you have electronic, chemical. But I suppose it's a good idea to learn English because it's the lingua franca in the academic world, in the business world. Everybody has a common language. It used to be Latin, like 500 years ago, 600 years ago, it was Latin. Everybody in Europe spoke Latin, but now it's English. Even the Chinese, they are learning English because it's a very important business tool for them. To be able to see your comments, I have to use a second laptop. That's why I'm taking like 2 seconds, a 2 second break every time. There's one to stream, and then one to see your comments. So I used to use Skype, but the problem with Skype is that it lags a lot. It's free, so I can't complain. It's free, so I'm not paying for it and anything. But it tends to lag. The quality sometimes is not very good. Plus, there's a limited number of people with whom you may speak on Skype. So I think it depends also on your internet speed. That's why we have switched to YouTube. But the only problem now is to find a way to read the comments at the same time. I think I will just move the laptop, put it just beneath me. so that I'll have a laptop on each side. Because otherwise they are not very powerful. They might crash. So what's the time over there? Let me see. Now it's perfect. So you're working for a research institute. I've heard about Bologna. It's a very famous university, Bologna. I think it's the oldest university in Europe, Bologna. And I also have friends who went to Firenze. And what are the languages that you speak apart from Italian? Do you know some French? In fact, if you know some French, it would be easier to learn English, I suppose, because they have some common roots. Many of the words in English, they come from French, and maybe also from Italian. I suppose from Latin. For example, the word observance. 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 In French, you have observer. Observer. So observer in French means the same thing to observe. Sometimes the words, they are exactly the same, but as I was saying previously, they are called false friends. For example, the word library. I think in Italian, maybe it would be librario or something like that, or in Spanish, but they don't mean the same thing. Because in French, for example, librairie, library. In French, there's a distinction between librairie and bibliothèque. Bibliothèque. I don't have the accent, but otherwise it's like that. Whereas in English, you have to be very careful there's a difference between library and book shop or bookstore. The bookshop is where the books are sold, whereas the library are the where you can go and have a card, a membership card. You can borrow books. Whereas in French, bibliothèque means library, and library means bookshop. So they are very confusing. They're called false friends. And there are many words like that. Sometimes they mean the same thing, sometimes they mean completely different things. Mm. I also have some friends in, I think it's called Turin. We have a third viewer. That's great. So maybe if you have any question, just let me know. Just type it down. And the difference between what thing? We have a third person. Hi. I suppose you're from Russia? Or maybe Ukraine? Mm. So let me just continue maybe with some vocabulary. Let's say somebody asks you, how are you? Maybe you could say, I'm fine. Thanks for asking. Or just, I'm fine. That would be a very simple way to respond. Ukraine. Okay. Um, so now, let's say there are two persons talking, but you have to interrupt them. Maybe it's something urgent. You could say, I don't mean to interrupt, but blah, 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 blah. For example, I don't mean to interrupt, but we have received an urgent email, an urgent request. So, yep, I don't mean, it means it's a very common way of speaking. You could say, I don't mean to be rude. There's a very famous song by Enrique Iglesias. I think it's called Tonight I'm Loving You. There's one of the sentences in that song. He says, I don't mean to be rude. It means I don't want to, yeah, it means I don't want to be impolite. So it's a very useful sentence. I don't mean to. So yeah, our Ukrainian friend, we are trying this for the first time. We used to use Skype, as I was saying. We use Skype, but Skype tends to lag, and Skype also has the limit on the maximum number of people you can reach. I think it's something like, theoretically it's 25. I think 25% can chat, but not more than that. So it's a bit not it's not very much. Whereas here there's no limit, and it's free. So that's a very important point. But the only problem is that I can't hear you unless we want. I think there are some websites when you could record a message. I think I don't remember the names, but you can record a voicemail. It's like it's the same way. It's like if you call somebody, you can't reach them. You leave a voicemail. You leave a message. It's the same principle. You leave a message, and then the other person, he knows the link. He can play the message back and hear, but that would be a bit inconvenient maybe for you. So to answer your question, how often do you spend? So that's the first online lesson on YouTube that we've tried so far. It was quite troublesome to set up everything, but we'll try to do this every day, maybe at the same time because of the time difference, maybe at around the same time. But maybe the best way to be informed about when we go live would be for you to subscribe. Maybe even if you, I suppose, if you go on the channel, there might be a way to get an alert, to set up an alert or something like that. I think it's they call it the notification bell. It's like a small bell. If you click on that, I think it's only for. I'm not sure. I will try to investigate this. But maybe yeah, subscribe and hopefully you'll catch me when I'm online. Uh, so let me continue with formal vocabulary, formal words, very useful words. For example, if somebody visits you or somebody calls you, you could say, "To what do I owe the pleasure?" It's a very sophisticated way uh, of saying why have you called or why have you come here. You could say, "To what do I owe you the pleasure?" Maybe the link will be different because every time that we create a broadcast, a live broadcast, there is a different URL. The URL will be different, but the channel link would be the same. So maybe you could save the channel link, the channel URL, but the video itself, it will have a different link. Maybe we could schedule some a common time, and then we could do like a Skype call. But it's better to have more than 2 or 3 persons because otherwise it takes a lot of time. I like to have like maybe at least 20. It's also, in fact, when there are many people, there tends to be, they call it like synergia, I think in Italian, synergia. Everybody, maybe there's a question that you did not think about, but somebody else, they asked this question, and then you end up learning something that's very useful. Otherwise, especially if somebody is very shy, maybe he won't ask any question, or if he's not thinking about that other thing, he would not ask this question. So then when there's a group chat, there's you tend to learn more. So yeah, we maybe next week we will try to schedule a common time for all of us. We need to know a common time, like there's a 8 or 10 hour time difference. I'm not sure about the time in Ukraine, but we have to find some common time. And let me see. There are also some I think Latin words that are used in English, but not very common. They are not very common. Their use is quite rare. For example, grosso modo. Grosso modo. It means roughly in English. It means roughly. Let's say you could say it costs grosso modo $12. So it means it costs roughly. It's spelled like that. I think it's the same in Latin or Italian. Grosso modo. Yeah, about the speaking part. Let me see, because my internet connection is not very good. I will see if I can open Skype, or maybe if you have Facebook. Yeah, I think if you have Facebook, there's something similar to Skype. It's less tends to take a lot of resources, whereas Facebook it's incorporated in the browser. So maybe a Facebook call would be uh, would be better. Maybe next time, because today it's a bit late. It's getting late here. But I could continue maybe for 30 minutes. Um, there's also the word cogitate. It's spelled C-O-G. Cogitate. It means it's a very formal way of saying to think hard about, to think hard about. Yeah, no worries about that. Uh, if you have any question, then maybe the chat would be better for you. But maybe we'll try something different next time. YouTube is great for streaming, but we will see about that. Cogitate. I think not maybe 60% of all the words in English, roughly 60%, maybe even more, they come from Latin, or maybe they come from Latin but through French. So let's see what I have noted down. For example, the word consolation. There's the same thing in French, consolation. You could say if it's any consolation. Let me just copy paste my notes. If it's any consolation. Yeah. So to our Ukrainian friend, if you want to know how to pronounce words, maybe you could go check. You could go there. It's an online dictionary where you can type most maybe every word that you will need to use. You can type there. There's a very likely possibility that it will be there. You'll find the British pronunciation and the American pronunciation. Cambridge. Let me just put it on top. So yep, it's if it's any consolation, blah blah blah. For example, if somebody has lost, let's say let's say your football team has lost, and you're interviewing maybe a player to be able to cheer him up. You could say, if it's any consolation, at least you've won the man of the match award, the man of the match trophy, or you something like that. Okay. And if we come back to the phrasal verbs, the people they tend the students they tend to um, to neglect this part of English. In English, you have a lot of word combinations. The combinations are called phrasal verbs. For example, you have the phrasal verb to listen up. It means to pay attention to somebody who's speaking, to pay attention. Somebody who's speaking. For example, you could say, listen up, everybody. Listen up, everybody. Everybody. That would be a way to get their attention. Let's say you're at the cafeteria and everybody is eating, making noise, and you have an announcement, an important announcement. You could say, listen up, everybody. I have an announcement. I have, or even at a wedding, you could say that, listen up. So it's not just listen, because otherwise, listen would not be the correct way of saying that. It listen would actually be interpreted as something rude. It means that you're angry, whereas listen up is the correct way of addressing everybody. Listen up. So yep, you should maybe note down every time you come across phrasal verbs. They are like maybe 1,000, maybe even more combinations between verbs and other words. Listen up. Let's see. Let's say you're working and somebody calls, but they have not reached the correct person, or they are looking for somebody else, or they are not they're not giving any name. You could say, how may I direct your call? Let's say especially if you're a secretary, you're answering calls at the switchboard, then you could say, how may I direct your call? Or may I take a message? If the person they are trying to call is not available, you could say, may I take a message? Phrasal verbs. Let me just go on Google, find the most common phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs. Keep up with. I'm sure you've heard of the Kardashians. Kardashians. Their show is called Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Kardashian. So to keep up with someone means to stay informed, to to means to stay aware of anything that's happening in their life, to keep up with somebody. There's also look forward to. Look forward to means to anticipate. For example, in a letter, you could say, I look forward to hearing from you, or to reading from you if you're expecting a letter. And that's a very important sentence. And there's a very common mistake that students of English tend to make. Let me just type it. Let's say, I look forward to seeing you next week. The common mistake that they make is they don't write seeing, or they use the, how they call it, the unconjugated version, the unconjugated form. They may write, I look forward to see you. No, it's not to see you, it's to seeing you, or to hearing from you. Hearing from you. So you have to conjugate the verb. It's pretty simple. It ends in ing. Hearing, seeing. Look forward to. So it's a very common mistake. Maybe you should memorize this. Phrasal verbs. To look down on. To look down on. It means to despise, to be condescendent, sort of to be arrogant, and to hold yourself to a higher status. To look down on. Maybe you could say, he looked down on such and such practice. That is, he denigrated. He sort of devaluated. Maybe you have achieved something, but the other person is jealous. They could say that it's not a big achievement, so they look down on your achievement, on your success. Phrasal verb. Let me see what I have. There's also it matters not. Phrasal verbs. To stand up is another common phrasal verb. To stand up. Stand up, to stand up for your rights, for example. To stand up for your rights means to protest, to ask somebody to respect your rights. That is, to stand up. That is, you are not passive. You're active. You're actively claiming that you have such or such right. There's also to stand out. That's a different one. To stand out means to contrast, to be prominent. For example, he stood out at the conference. He was everybody noticed him, so he stood out. Or for example, if you are applying for a job and you want to make your application stand out, that is, if you want to make your application, if you want the employer to notice your application, you want it to stand out. And one way of doing so would be to to use original to have an original introduction instead of saying I am applying for your for this job, blah blah blah. Maybe you could have a more creative way of catching his attention, his or her attention. That's why you should take time when you write your letter, your cover letter. They call it cover letter, or sometimes they call it letter of motivation. Cover letter, letter of motivation. That's the letter that you write when you're applying for a job. Usually you accompany it with your CV. The Americans, they call CV resume. Sometimes they use an accent. They put an accent maybe here. Sometimes they use two accents. They put one on each. In fact, this comes from the French word resume. So maybe the correct spelling should be one accent on each E, resume. But there's no right or wrong way. The Americans, sometimes they use just one, resume. It means the same thing, CV, curriculum vitae. To stand back. To stand back means to keep a certain distance from something. Maybe there's a murder, there's a crime scene, and the policemen, they don't let you be too close to the body or to to the car or whatever is present at the crime scene. So they tell you to stand back, or in fact they might say stand back or stand aside. To stand aside. Stand aside. Stand aside means to stand on the side so that somebody else, maybe if somebody is coming through, but it's a very narrow corridor or something like that, they could say, please stand aside, let me pass. Break off. To break off. Break off. For example, if you're seeing somebody, if you have a girlfriend or boyfriend and you want to end the relationship, the term for that is to break off. We broke off, for example. We broke off means we stop dating, we stop seeing each other. Break off. To turn around. To turn around. Especially if you're driving and you have entered the wrong road, then you have to turn around. Sometimes it's called a U-turn. U-turn. Oops. U-turn. The U in this case, it means to do a turn that is in the form of a U, a 180 degrees turn. U-turn. Especially if you're going for your driving test, if you want to get your license, maybe the examiner will ask you to perform a U-turn. He will test your skills to be able to go in and then go back the other way. U-turn. take down. That's another phrasal verb, to take down. For example, if you have posted something on Facebook, and let's say you have written something about somebody. Let's say you have criticized somebody. That person might come and say, I would like you to take down. That means to remove, to delete, to take down. Or if you've uploaded a video on the internet and that person would like you to delete it, he could say to take down. I would like you to take down this video. Take down. To sign up. That's a very common expression. Very common phrasal verb, to be more precise. Sign up. Let's say sign up means to enroll. Let's say there's an association, a volunteer group who's maybe a charity, and you would like to be a member of that. You would like to volunteer. In that case, you would be signing up for example, sign up for this volunteer job. Sign up. Let's say if you're giving food to homeless people, you're signing up for this volunteer activity. Yeah, to be able to find the link, because I suppose it will be a different link. Maybe the best way is to subscribe, and then when the new link will be on, you will receive a notification in your, maybe it will be in the new I think it's called how's it called? I will try to come online every day at the same time, hopefully. Yeah, at the same time. But if you have anything in particular, if you have anything you would like, if you have any question, then just feel free to ask, and I will try to answer. Otherwise, I can continue on maybe with useful words, with useful sentences. These are the ones that you will use in your daily life. So let's continue to pick up. To pick up. Oops. To pick up means to lift. For example, I've picked up. Sometimes it can means to just take. To take. For example, I've picked up the groceries. Let's say if you have already purchased something online, but you just have to go and take it. In that case, you could say I've picked up the merchandise. I've picked up the gifts, and so on. To pick up. To turn down. Turn down. Let's say you have received a job offer, but you don't want to accept it. So in that case, you would say, I'm sorry, but I have to turn down this offer, but I would like to thank you, blah, blah, blah. To turn down. To subscribe to the channel. I think if you scroll down, you will see the red button